Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. No one could get near that bull. Until this kid came along. In the arid plains of the Texas Panhandle, where the air is dry as leather and the wind lifts the red dust of forgotten paths, stretched the Ranch Taylor, a vast area of almost 200 hectares, about 30 kilometers south of Lubbock. There were endless fences of dry wood, barns with rusty sheets that creaked in the slightest draft, and sun-beaten fields where a few sturdy horses and cows with dull eyes grazed. The owner of the domain, Buck Taylor, was a living legend in the rodeo world. In the 1980s, he was known as the Steel Leather of Texas. He had won dozens of national competitions, held off beasts no one dared to ride, and carried America's colors to the arenas of Brazil. Today, at 62 years old, his body bore the marks of this life of defiance, a stiff leg, an old scar across his back, and a tired look, both proud and melancholy. He had not ridden for a long time, but his reputation remained intact throughout the southern states. However, in later years, it was no longer his name that was remembered, but that of an animal. A black bull, gigantic, with a name as menacing as its appearance, Diablo. It wasn't a nickname given to scare children. It was a reality. Diablo was terror incarnate. A monster of muscles, as tall as a wall, weighing more than 900 kilos, with a coat as black as tar and eyes so red they looked like living embers. His breath smoked on winter days, like a dragon rising from hell. His horns, curved like two wolf fangs, seemed made to pierce the soul as much as the flesh. Diablo was no mere rodeo bull. He had become a legend, or a curse. In 3 years, of the dozens of horsemen had tried their luck on his back, none had lasted more than 3 seconds. Some left with multiple fractures. Others left the arena in wheelchairs. One Nevada champion, Rick, the Prowler, Wallace, even retired after just one attempt, whispering that he had seen death in the beast's eyes. Videos circulated on the internet showing Diablo leaping out of the cage like a cannonball, knocking down barriers, trampling the sand with the rage of an animal that nature itself had forgotten to tame. Some said he was the son of the devil, that he had been injured by a man and had never forgiven again. Others swore that Hesmold of fear men before they even enter the arena. Even at the ranch, no more employees approached his enclosure. He was fed from a distance, his area was cleared with mechanical traps. His mere presence was enough to sow tension throughout the estate. His hooves could be heard scraping the ground at night, like a threat from the depths. Buck, despite its legendary hardness, was beginning to give up. He was not a man to give up easily, but Diablo wasn't a challenge, he was an abyss. The old cowboy had tried everything, the most experienced trainers, tranquilizers, gentle methods, confrontation. Nothing worked. The bull remained unpredictable, violent, and increasingly dangerous. So Buck began to consider the unthinkable: euthanasia. Not out of revenge, nor out of hatred, but out of necessity. He didn't want a man to die. He didn't want the animal to suffer either. It was a decision he kept to himself, a thought he mulled over alone, at sunset, sitting on the porch, a bottle of bourbon between his fingers. And then, by one of those strange twists of fate, something changed. One August morning, as the sun slowly rose in the burning sky, a rusty pickup stopped in front of the ranch. A man got out, accompanied by a thin teenager, his arms crossed over a canvas suitcase. Elijah Brooks, 14 years old, had just arrived. His gaze was closed, his gestures slow, his silence heavy. Just another kid, Buck thought. A little summer worker, like hundreds he'd seen. He had no idea that this boy would change everything. Elijah Brooks, barely 14 years old, had already experienced no more loss and silence than many men twice his age. 3 years earlier, a tragic fire had consumed the small wooden house where he lived with his parents in Lubbock. An electrical fault, a short circuit in an old heating outlet. He had survived, alone. Asleep that night in the garage, he woke up suffocating in the smoke, unable to save those he loved. Since that day, Elijah hardly spoke anymore. He didn't cry either. He had closed himself off from the world like a stone at the bottom of a river, polished by pain, erased by the currents. Foster families came and went, never breaking through his silence. He was weird, some said. Too quiet, not sociable. A child no one really understood, except animals. He always seemed to have a mysterious bond with them. Stray dogs followed him for no reason. Wild cats purred against his leg. Even nervous horses calmed down when he approached. It was in this context that he was entrusted for the summer Toth Carter family, a childless farming couple who lived not far from the Taylor Ranch. Simple, discreet, George E. T. Martha Carter expected nothing from Elijah except that he be safe and have enough to eat. George, who sometimes lent a hand to Buck Taylor to carry bales of hay or repair fences, offered one morning to take Elijah with him. "This kid needs some fresh air. A little dust in his boots won't hurt him. Maybe he'll say a few words if he sees a cow." Buck, grumpy but curious, shrugged and agreed. And so, Elijah first set his boots in the dust of the Taylor Ranch. He said nothing, as always. He listened. He observed. And he set to work. As the days went by, he became a familiar shadow in the ranch setting. Always dressed in oversized jeans, a threadbare shirt and a dirty cap, he worked without ever complaining. He swept the stables with an almost ritualistic slowness, as if he were erasing the world with each sweep. He sewed up the ripped sacks of grain with infinite patience. He changed the water in the troughs without anyone having to tell him twice. It wasn't the strength of his arms that impressed, but the constancy of his silence. Buck, who had seen dozens of kids parade through the ranch, watched him out of the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything either. But he took note. He saw this strange, almost religious calm that surrounded Elijah. And above all, he saw how the animals reacted to his presence. Even the most fearful horses, the ones that kicked at the slightest noise, calmed down when the boy came into the stable. An old, injured dog, whom no one was allowed to go near, fell asleep one day at his feet. Buck frowned. It wasn't natural. It was as if the kid was giving off a frequency that only animals could hear. And then, one evening, the sky was turning a dark orange. The hills cast long, unreal shadows in the golden light of dusk. Buck was about to head back when something caught his eye. Elijah. Alone. Standing in front of Diablo's enclosure. Buck dropped his hat to the ground. His heart leaped in his chest. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He remained frozen. A few meters away from him, the boy stood straight, arms at his sides, his eyes fixed on the black mass which was staring back at him. Diablo. The monster. The demon. And yet, he didn't move. Not a raspy breath. Not a grunt. No hooves pounding the ground. Not that thunderous tension he usually shot like lightning through the air. None. The bull was immobile as if time had stood still between two heartbeats. As if something sacred had just happened. Buck took a step back, stunned. He felt a cold sweat run down his temple. He finally cried out, in a trembling, dry voice. "Back off, son. Do you want to die or what?" But Elijah didn't jump. He turned his head slightly, without fear, without panic, without tension. His eyes were calm. And his voice, when it rose, was neither loud nor bravado. It was true. He's not dangerous. He's just alone. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the Texas sky turned ochre and purple, Elijah stood on the ranch steps, hands in pockets, staring at the old cowboy who was finishing his coffee near the stable. He'd never really spoken to Buck. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand anything. But that night, he broke the silence. "I want to take care of him," he said in a calm voice. Buck looked up in surprise. He didn't need to ask who he was talking about. He knew. "Diablo? Have you lost your mind? That bull isn't an animal. It's a bomb with horns." Elijah didn't answer. He stood there, straight as a stone, his dark eyes shining with quiet determination. Buck raised his voice. "Listen to me, kid, I forbid you. It's not a game, it's not a goat to pet. It'll gut you before you even have time to blink. But Elijah repeated, very quietly. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. He just wants to be talked to. He wants to be seen. Buck, fuming, turned on his heel. He had heard enough madness for one day that he refused point blank. But what he didn't know was that the boy's decision didn't need permission. The next morning, Buck went down as usual before dawn to check the fences. And he saw it. Elijah. Sitting cross-legged in the dust, a few meters from Diablo's enclosure. He wasn't moving. He was speaking quietly. Not singing, not reciting some strange prayer. Just, while conversing as if he were talking to an invisible friend. As if he were telling something he had kept locked away for too long. Buck froze, his breath hitching. The bull was there, a few meters behind the barrier. Motionless. He wasn't charging. He was listening. The day after tomorrow, same thing. And again the next day. And the day after that. Every morning, every evening, like Assalant ritual, Elijah stood in the same spot. He never crossed the boundary. He never carried any equipment, no rope, no stick. Just his lean body, his imperturbable calm, and his soft, almost whispered voice, which only Diablo seemed to understand. Buck gave in. Reluctantly. Not because he believed it. But because he no longer understood what he saw. He discreetly placed 2 employees armed with tranquilizers at a distance, just in case. He remained at a distance, but with his eyes wide open, unable to look away. And every day, Elijah moved forward. One step further. A breath of confidence. He spoke with respect. He didn't extend his hand without invitation. He waited for Diablo let him come. He watched him for a long time, attentive to the slightest tension in his muscles, to the slightest change in his breathing. He did not seek to subdue him, that he sought to honor her. After 2 weeks, the boy entered for the first time in the enclosure. Buck held his breath. His fists clenched. But Diablo didn't flinch. He looked at him. He assessed him. And he remained immobile, as if he finally recognized something in this frail being: pain. Loneliness. Loss. In the 3rd week, Elijah placed his hand, slowly, on the beast's muzzle. The warmth of the skin, the animal's vibrant breath, the wide-open eyes that no longer betrayed rage, only a primitive, overwhelming curiosity. Ranch veterans, men accustomed to the worst beasts, kept their distance, hard on the edge of the lips. They looked at each other, unable to believe what they were seeing. After a month, the miracle took place. One morning, as the sun was barely rising, Elijah entered as usual, his palm open, holding a red apple. Diablo slowly approached. He tilted his head, end date from his hand. Buck felt his knees buckle slightly. He leaned against the fence post. A lump formed in his throat. Then something even more improbable happened. Diablo lay down. And in a slow movement, as if seeking shelter after years of wandering, laid his head on Elijah's knees. A deep silence fell over the ranch. Even the birds seemed to stop. The boy gently ran his fingers over the bull's head, like a rediscovered brother. And there, without anyone really seeing it, Buck Taylor, the rock-hard cowboy, the man with scars and a dry heart, raised his rough hand, and wiped away a tear. He understood at that moment that what no man, no method, no force had managed to tame, a child had healed. Not by domination. But by reconnaissance. By a form of love that is not taught in any book. On September 15th, the Lone Star Rodeo Championship was held in Amarillo. A legendary Texas event, where the best cowboys compete in front of over 20,000 screaming spectators. This is where reputations are made, and broken. For Buck Taylor, it was the arena of legends. And for Diablo, the 2,000-pound bull with a reputation for killing, it was the site of all past tragedies. But this year, Buck hadn't entered any riders or competitions. He had entered a momentous silent moment, 1,000 miles from the ropes and bells, the screams and falls. A moment between a broken boy, and a broken animal. He had Elijah listed. When they arrived that night, the stands were packed. The speakers crackled. The smells of hay, sweat, and popcorn wafted through the warm Amarillo air. Backstage, the other trainers laughed at Buck. "You want to bring in Thiskid? With Thistle? Are you going to have a live burial or what?" But Buck didn't answer. He had seen what no one else had. Not even Elijah. The setting sun tinted the arena with gold and dust. Then the speaker announced into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to see is not a test. It is not a challenge. It's an encounter. Between two people whom life has not spared. Please welcome Elijah Brooks and Diablo." A silence fell. The spotlight focused on a frail figure. Elijah, alone in the center of the arena, hatless, ropeless, defenseless. He walked slowly, his hands outstretched. The audience held its breath. Then, the heavy doors opened. And Diablo appeared. A shudder ran through the stands. Shouts of alarm rang out. Mothers grabbed their children. Some thought the bull was going to charge, strike, trample. But no. It was walking. Heavily. Slowly. And facing the boy, he stopped. Elijah didn't move. He held out his hand. Then, in a whisper that only angels could have heard, he whispered, "I am here." Then Diablo folded his legs. He placed one knee in the dust. Then the other. Then, he bowed. Gently. As if paying homage to something sacred. And there, in an almost divine silence, Elijah knelt down in turn. He placed his hand on the giant's head. And Diablo, that undefeated monster, laid his head on the boy's knees. The arena exploded. No screams of fear. No mocking laughter. A standing ovation. Tears. People standing, hands on their hearts, as if they had seen a miracle. Buck, standing against the fence, had misty eyes. He took off his hat. He murmured, "By all the saints, this kid healed what even God had forsaken." And that evening, in the newspapers, on social media, and even in fireside chats, there was no talk of records, falls, or titles. They talked about an orphaned boy and a wild bull. And about the time they found peace together. As they left the arena, the spotlight still illuminated the turned-over sand, the stands echoed with the last echoes of ovations, and the smell of leather, dust and emotion floated in the warm Texan evening air. A local reporter, shaken by what she had just witnessed, pushed her way through the crowd to reach the young boy. Elijah was still gently stroking Diablo's neck, his powerful breath stirring up clouds of sand with each exhalation. "How did you manage to do that, son? He attacked everyone except you." The question resonated in the suspended silence. Elijah, his eyes still wet, didn't answer right away. He leaned down, rested his forehead against the bull's, then slowly turned to face the journalist. "I've known loneliness. The real kind. The kind that makes you forget the sound of your own voice. When no one listens to you, when you have nothing left to prove because no one expects anything from you." He looked down. He and I weren't scared. We recognized each other. There was nothing more to say. What Elijah had done that night was neither training nor a miracle. It was a meeting of souls. Two battered hearts that had found each other in the tumult. Buck Harrison, the rancher, had seen it all from the sidelines. For the first time since his son's death, he felt a new warmth within him. Something unexpected, hope. A few weeks later, Buck began the process of becoming Elijah's legal guardian. The boy, who had been bounced from foster home to foster home, finally found a bed of his own, a table where he could eat without fear, and a man to tell him, "You belong here." Elijah returned to school, with difficulty at first. But every morning, after feeding the horses, he entered the classroom with his boots full of dust and his notebooks under his arm. In the evening, he returned to the stable to care for the injured animals, and often sat in the shade of the old oak tree to read aloud, with Diablo lying beside him. Over time, Elijah founded a unique program in Texas, Silent Bonds, a rehabilitation center for aggressive animals and distressed youth. There, adrift teenagers encountered unpredictable horses, abandoned dogs, and frightened bulls. And, like Elijah had done with Diablo, they learned to listen, and to be heard. As for Diablo, he lived for 8 more years. Far from the shouting, far from the arenas. He never wore a saddle again, never saw a rope again. Every day, he walked freely across the great golden pastures of the Harrison Ranch, closely followed by Elijah, now a calm, strong, but still discreet young man. And in Texas, when we talk about the legend of Diablo and the Silent Boy, voices lower. Gazes drift into the distance. For this story is not just about an animal said to be lost, nor about a child the world had cast aside. It is that of an encounter. Of an invisible bond, stronger than fear. That of a wounded heart, and another who recognized it.